So we didn't do it last time, but we should probably commit our work now that we have test passing. So let's go ahead and run git status, git add, git commit, have password reset, and recover account endpoints set up. Great. Now ready to go. And so up next, we're going to do a little bit of work on mocking our email service in our tests, and also making sure that when we send our emails, that these two methods use our send email method correctly. So this is going to be a little bit of a deeper dive into testing, but it is a good thing to know when dealing with external services in Node.js. So let's do that. Now, in this situation, we're actually going to write a few more tests that will be slightly more involved. So don't be scared. We're going to write a bunch of code down really quickly in our email.test file, but most of it is standard to mocking services. And so if you haven't done any mocking before, this might look weird to you. If you have, this might look a little familiar, but it'll be with the Jest syntax. Otherwise, we'll kind of explain this as we go. So let's talk about it quickly. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to hop right in here and create two mock responses. So I'm going to say mock success response is equal to status code 202 status message, and we'll just say success or something along those lines. Then down here we'll say mock failure response is equal to status code 400 body should be let's just say it's going to always be the to field, and the message is going to say missing to field. Cool. Now, again, a mock is just like, it's just essentially replicating a production value, but instead of actually calling, say, an API or an external service to get that real production value, we just mock it. We create a dummy version of it, and we use that instead of actually calling the service, just to replicate how it would behave if we were to actually call it. And so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a mock send email method that will be called instead of the actual send email method on our email service here. So we're going to mock this as well. And mocking it is actually pretty easy in Jest. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to say const mock send email is equal to jest dot function fn dot mock implementation. And then we're going to mock the implementation of our email method, which takes in an email configuration object. And then, instead of going through all of this motions to actually use the transport and send an email and all that stuff, instead what we're going to do is we're just going to say if not email.hasOwnProperty to, then we're going to return the mock, an array containing the mock failure response. Otherwise, we're going to return an array containing the mock success response. And so we're mocking the send email method by just returning values here so that we don't actually have to call that method on the email service. We can just pretend we did, and this is how we know it will respond given certain conditions. Then we're going to use Jest to mock the node mailer module. So we have no control over this node mailer module. It's code that someone else has provided to us. And so it's actually really nice to be able to mock it, because then we can tell it exactly how we want it to behave, and we don't have to depend on the code itself. So we can come in here, we can say create transport should, instead of creating the actual node mailer transport, let's just create a function that, again, mocks implementation to have a function that returns an object with the send mail method equal to our mock send email. Now, why are we doing this? Well, let's take a look at our actual email service for a second. It imports this node mailer and node mailer send grid module, and then it creates this transport here using the node mailer.create transport method. What we've done here is we've mocked that. We're saying, hey, I want you to consider the node mailer module. Instead of using the one from npm, use this fake one that we're creating right here. And all I want it to do is return a object that has a create transport method, just like node mailer does. But instead of returning all of this goodness, we're just going to return our fake version here, which contains a create transport attribute that is set equal to jest.function.mock implementation. So we're mocking a fake function here with jest, and it's going to return an object that contains a single method, which is the mock send email or mock send. We could call it mock send mail, whatever. That'd probably be more accurate. And so then, whenever this email service gets instantiated, it's going to attach the fake node mailer instead of the real node mailer, and it'll be our fake transport instead of the real transport. Then we can actually set this equal to true. We can set it equal to active in certain situations and actually send real emails. I'm using quotations here, real emails that calls this send mail function here. So that's all it'll do. We're mocking this node mailer setup because mocking is, again, it's just the process of replacing external dependencies with objects that we are in control of. And we do that to ensure that whatever values are returned, we decide exactly what they are, and we don't have to depend on the external service or call that external service, which is a huge plus. So then, when we go into this test send email, we can do some other interesting things here. We can then create an email service. You know how we have this default email service here that we've instantiated? We can do the same thing, but instead, we can set this one equal to active. We can say, hey, I want you to be true. You're active now. And so then it'll actually call this send email function, is active will be true, and it'll go through this whole process. But when it gets to here, when it calls this.transport, this.transport, instead of being equal to the node mailer.createTransport, it'll be equal to this mock node mailer.createTransport that we created here. And so by doing that, we can then test that our service, the rest of our service, is actually working exactly as we expect it to. And so then the rest of this can stay the same, but down here we can say expect mock send email to have been called with the email object. And so we can do all kinds of cool things like introspect our mock functions and expect them to have been called with certain parameters. And that's really useful. And we can do the same thing here. We can set up our mock service, our email service, our real email service. And then when we call this, we can again expect it to have been called with email. Now the other cool thing is right here, instead of expecting the res to be equal to all of this, we can set it equal to, we can say something like this. We can say expect res to equal status 400 email, and then the error should equal to mock failure response dot body, because we know that that's what's going to be returned here. And that's really useful. That's like a really cool thing that we can do and make our life a little bit easier. So then if we run this test again, we can say npm test -- email.test.js with our new mocking system set up. Hopefully, those tests all still pass. So we know that it is still working and it is still doing exactly what we expect it to, even when the email service is actually active, which is great for us because then we can actually test the methods inside the email service and they actually run instead of having to depend on this mock system we set up right here. So having done that, we can then go in there and let's go ahead and test our new methods, which are going to describe sending password reset emails. And let's do that by first testing that the send password reset email sends an email to provided user. Cool. And let's do the same thing here. Let's create our email service with that sets its active to true. And then let's go in here and let's create a new user, or let's just create a user. It's equal to email lebron@james.io. And again, we'll say that this user forgot their password. Let's give them a fake token, ABC123, and let's create a res, which is equal to the email service dot send password reset email with the user and the token. Let's expect that res to equal a status of 202, an email object that is equal to, well, let's set that in a second, and an error of null. Remember that this email should contain a 2. Let's actually just do this right now. It should have 2 user.email. It should be from, and we'll set what this is from, but at the moment let's go with rate my setup.app@gmail.com, and subject will be reset your password for rate my setup. And then the HTML should just be some string, a string, expect any string. And so this is the email configuration object that should be passed to our email. And actually, let's extract that into a variable. Const email is equal to this, and then we'll just pass all of this right here. Ta-da! Okay, now, once we do that, we should also expect that the email service, or let's say mock, let's do the same thing here, mock send email to have been called with the correct email. Just like that. So we'll save that. Looks good. Let's do one more test here. And we'll say test send password reset confirmation email sends a confirmation email to provided user. Async, good to go. And we'll do pretty much the exact same thing here. Let's just copy paste all of this, but let's change it around a little bit. In this case, we don't need a token. We don't need to send the token, the send password reset email. And in this case, it's just going to say your rate my setup password has been reset successfully. Something like that. That should be the subject. And then everything else should be almost identical. So we can go ahead and save this and test it to make sure it fails. It does. We have 2 failures. Great. Let's go ahead and then go in here and actually get those tests passing. But we'll do that in the next video because it's already gone long enough. We've covered a little bit about how to mock our email service. Just a few simple configuration setups so that we mock this and make sure things are working correctly. And then we can go in and actually test the real methods on our email service.